Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Hope25 Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Kappa, and I'm really excited to be here with Julie-anne Laird today.
Yeah,
Julie-anne is an amazing person that I've known for a few years now. And it's great to have you here, Julie-anne, to have a bit of a chat about Hope25, about ministry, and particularly today about how we think about doing evangelism and talking to people about faith. So
yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your
yeah,
background and story a little?
yeah. So I grew up in a Christian home, but ended up really just having a couple of my friends in high school become Christians, and they really were transformed by Jesus. And so it was sort of like weird to me going, oh, wow, actually God can do quite amazing things. And so really I just went, wow, like this is so transformative for people knowing who Jesus is and living their lives for him. And so I really just was excited by that and just went, oh, how can I help all my friends know Jesus? So so I guess it took me a little while to work out maybe I've got a gift of evangelism. I just thought this was a normal, everyday Christian thing. And then ended up in ministry and ended up, worked as a school chaplain, and I worked in youth and young adults ministry. And then I ended up finding my feet in student ministry and just realizing, wow, this is just so awesome in terms of there's just a whole group of people who are thinking about what is life about, and actually faith is a big part of this for people, and they just don't know what to do with it. And yeah, I just loved student ministry and just seeing the opportunities. And one of the staff workers ended up saying to me, Julie-anne, can you please work out what you do to help us? And I went, what? They just talk about Jesus, this is easy. And then I realized, actually, if I can work out what I do and help others, that will be a real gift to the church and other Christians. So, but boy, it took me a long time. It took me a really long time to work out how does this happen naturally and easily and why. And so it's taken me a long time to unpack what I do and to be able to go to the point of helping others. So that's sort of been my goal. And then interestingly, I went from one university to another one, and they invited me just to do evangelism. And
Oh, wow.
seriously, it was like a weight lifted from my head in terms of going, wow, I can just spend my whole time doing this well. And that was the frustrating thing for me. I went, we are not actually serving people who are unbelievers well by doing this half baked. And so, yeah, I was really just trying to work out and just gave me space to think about, well, how can I enter their world and help them move forward? And yeah, it ended up spent around 13 years in that space, just really understanding and getting to know how the students thought about things and just working out ways that we as Christians could really just lovingly help them along that journey of to faith. And yeah, it was just a great time of just helping students come to faith. And I think, got better and better every year. And so when I left AFES, yeah, I was just really keen to work out, is this helpful for churches? Could I be a gift to the church in really just helping churches get going with evangelism? And yeah, so that's where Ripple Effect emerged. It's the training in some ways that I started trialing out at uni, and then we've developed it for the everyday Christian. And I think we need to be discipled in evangelism. I think we're quite far behind. I used to say I would spend quite a bit of time getting to know every first year, not every first year, like each year,
Yeah.
a whole group of first years who weren't Christians, and just trying to understand what is the language they're speaking. And I realized, every year it was slightly different. And so actually, if I didn't keep up, I would just end up with this gap. And I think that's what's happened with churches is we didn't quite understand the shift every year around the culture. And so we've ended up with quite a gap between us and unbelievers. And yeah, I feel like, what I would love is the gap to be closed a bit more.
It's one of those funny things, isn't it, evangelism? Because there's people, the scriptures talk about gifts,
Yeah.
different kinds of gifts,
Yeah.
and all the different kind of gifts that
Yeah.
people have. And I'm always like encouraged and challenged when Paul says to Timothy, do the work of an
Yes.
evangelist,
Yeah.
because it kind of implies, like for me, I was listening to a talk one time by Randy Newman, who's an
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
evangelist person, and he was saying, you know, there's two kinds of people. There's those who are kind of gifted in evangelism and those who aren't, but still called to do it.
Yeah.
And you can tell which one you are. And he says, you know, the ones who are gifted in evangelism are the ones who get on an airplane and they're like,
Yeah.
please, Jesus, sit someone next to me who wants to talk to
Yeah.
me. And then it's like, and then there's the rest of us who are like, please, God, let there be an empty seat. And if there's not, let it be someone who just is quiet with their headphones on. I just want to get through this flight. And I thought, yeah, that's much more me.
Yeah.
So I think the question for, you know, the rest of us who are
Yeah.
maybe not gifted in evangelism, but go, okay, yeah, this is something that is part of mission.
Yeah.
It's part of what God calls us to do. I need to work out how I fit in with this. Is exactly about training and exactly about how we engage with the people around us that we love and care for.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I categorize the different relationships that we're in around random, reputation, and real relationships. And I often think those conversations that you have in a plane are the easy way out, because there's no cost to it. Like, as in, you're just never going to see them again. And like, they're sort of fun. And I tell the story about how in student ministry, I've been to over 200 and I think around 250 weddings. And at every reception, I'm either at a table of 19, 20-year-olds who are all Christians, and I'm like the old person in the group, or I'm at every table, at a table with every single uncle and auntie who are anti-Christian, or every work colleague. And
Okay, this is the work wedding.
and I keep on going, oh, well, I'll just have some fun with this, like see what God does. And like, it's really easy for me because you just they're randoms. And so, but I actually think the hard one is the real relationships, like your friends and family. And people in the old days got given, you know, 4 spiritual laws or 2 ways to live, and you do that and they weren't a Christian. Now what do you do? And so actually I love the real relationships. Like, how do you actually help your family and friends? Well, actually, what I try and say is, how do you live it out well in a way that they want to know more? And so, and how do you speak about your faith really honestly and truthfully? And I love doing that for the everyday Christian. Is actually, these are real relationships, and how do we be better at this? And so so we're with City to City. I ended up I've spent a couple of years. It always takes a little while to work out, well, how am I going to really help churches? And we've come up with 5 things that try and create an ecosystem to really make it work in a church. And you've got to have the everyday Christians on board, you've got to have your gifted evangelists on board, and you've got to have your ministry team and structures and culture all sort of working together to be able to help people come to faith. So it's quite a bit of work for churches, but also and I keep on saying, it's interesting, 10 years ago, churches weren't ready for this because they thought they knew how to do evangelism. But like, I'd be looking on the side going, come on, you guys, like, we've got to step this up. Whereas now I feel like, okay, churches are actually ready they've worked out, okay, we need a hand. And like, I've seriously got so much work.
Well, maybe Hope25 will get you even more. Like, who knows?
And it's been lovely. Like, I've worked with quite a lot of Anglican churches and really trying to help them move forward. And you learn lessons like, okay, why didn't this move forward? Okay, what can we do to really just make this have some real momentum?
So what do you think some of the things might be in our church culture and things that stop us from I guess talking to our friends and family and living out this everyday evangelism?
I think there's quite a few reasons. They mostly boil down to fear. And also unskilled. So they mostly fit into those categories.
And they kind of relate to each other as well. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not skilled at something, you're going to be more nervous about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like the culture is, the meta narrative around our culture is fairly negative towards the Christian faith. But what I find though is if you're talking to your neighbor or to a good friend, they're mostly not antagonistic towards you because they know you and love you. And so we have this fear from the meta narrative and think that, this is going to be the way forward. Fortunately, I've had quite a few friends become Christians. And so when they become Christians, they give you feedback on how you've gone.
Oh, that's great.
And I think what I've learned out of that feedback is actually people are more interested than I realize. They don't give me much more, like, I'd want more from them to see, but they just give me little hints. And I've had to notice those little hints are actually bigger hints than I think. And so, sometimes I get it wrong, but my posture now is, they're probably actually interested. Let's go with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think often when we think about doing evangelism, we're nervous that people will think that we're going to like Bible bash them or something. And what we see through media or, as we walk through maybe public areas in our city is stuff that we go, I don't know if I quite want to be associated with that. Is that what people are going to think of me? Are my friends going to be like, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this person now? And so often that's not the case.
Yeah, no, but also when you're in and this is what I keep on saying, if you're a friend, actually you've got quite a lot of room to move in that people are okay with you making mistakes and you can say sorry and I often apologize for other Christians, like, I'm sorry that was hurtful in the public space. That's okay. But you're in a relationship, and I think we've got quite a lot of friendship credit in relationships. And I just want people to be struck by what a difference Jesus makes in my life. And like one time I was having a really rough morning. I've got four, they're all young adults now, but when they were little, I have got 4 children, trying to get them off to school, and I did not do well. And you can rock up to the gate and everyone's go, how you going? And I could have said, yeah, fine, we got here eventually. And I just said, actually, I had a really rough morning. I had to put myself into timeout.
Yeah.
I said, I just got on my knees and laid over the bed and I said, God, can you please help me? I'm just struggling so much and I can't, I'm putting too much weight on things that don't really matter. And anyway, there were kids all knocking on the door and I'm just going, I just need to keep praying. Anyway, but my unbelieving friend said, she said, well, at least you had somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And so for her, what does she do in that situation? Where does she go? And it was just a really quite poignant moment for me going, actually what I'm doing is even in my bad times, I'm just helping. Well, actually, I'm just living it out. I'm living out my life with Jesus and what does this look like? And and I think that's an interesting thing for people. What does a life with Jesus look like? And I think that's sort of, what I've been trying to encourage people is to live it out more honestly and openly. And and just I have 14 things. I do this workshop on 14 things I've learned and really create leverage. Not leverage, that sounds manipulative, but how do you create opportunities or openness in your friends and family? It's been fun to do.
And I mean, in that story, there's just a wonderful authenticity as well. I think, sometimes people say to me, like, the church can't even sort itself out. Why should we think that we could do evangelism? Like, what actually do we have to offer people when, we there's still domestic violence, with people in our churches. There's still all of these kinds of different things where the church is not perfect and not what we want to be. So how could we possibly invite people into that? And I go, I think there's still something that we have. And I think you just pinpoint that really nicely.
Yeah. And interestingly, like I really have a love for the local church and I I just think there is something just ordinary about the local church. We just represent, or hopefully we represent the culture that we're in, by all the mix of diversity of people that come. And, you know, like in our local church, we had a young woman who has quite a stutter. And I was asking the young adults in our church, because I was running the young adults at the time, do you mind, like, can you think of something you'd like to do to serve at church? And this young woman ended up saying, I'd really like to do the Bible reading. And I went, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
And she got up and did the Bible reading, and everyone's going, okay. And she did it perfectly. Like, she had practiced and practiced and practiced, and we're all clapping. And I went, it's so funny, because if there was a new person in the service, they'd be going, do you clap after every time?
Yeah.
Do a Bible reading? Yeah.
Sometimes the content is not quite the thing you want to clap for, is it?
And I'm just going, that's what the local church is. It's just actually loving people for where they're at and seeing how God's moving them forward. And I just think there's something really beautiful about the local church, and what an expression of that out into the community. And I just love that.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that too. It's it's so funny. The local church, it's a wonderful, wonderful and beautiful thing. And I love you've got this, I think C.S. Lewis puts it really well in the Screwtape Letters, where he kind of says, like, if you want the person to not go to church anymore, just have them have a really good hard look at the people who they're in church with. They would never usually hang out with these people.
Exactly.
And it's like, it's often people that we wouldn't ordinarily meet in our everyday life. You've got people from all over the place, and yet beautifully together, and beautifully in relationship with one another.
And so intergenerational. And I think for a lot of young people, they miss that. They miss the intergenerational just mix of, and having people who really love you and invest in you. Anyway, so I just think the local church is a beautiful thing, and let's open it up for people who are unbelievers to just really enter that space. So.
It's a really it's a really interesting thing, the way that in that intergenerational mix, you've also got people coming from very different points of view on how we expect people outside the church to relate to the church, because, you know, society has changed so much. I used to teach this class in religious pluralism with Flinders Uni, and one of our assessments, so we would go to all these different places and students would do assignments on different religions, and many of them didn't really know how to talk about faith at all. So one of the assessments that I set for them was to talk to a friend who was a person of faith. They didn't know what faith in this particular class, but go talk to a friend who's a person of faith. And they were really nervous about it. And I was just saying to them, I just want you to ask them, like, what is it for that? What is it like for them being a person of faith in Australia? And it was really interesting, the assessments that I got back, because I would get back these assessments from students going, I've been friends with this person for 15 years, which for you, like a 19-year-old, is a very long time. You know, and we've never talked about their faith before. And now I feel like we're so much better friends than we were before, because there's this whole area of their life that I realized we just don't talk about. And now I've talked to them about it. I don't know why we didn't talk about it.
I know. Oh, and one of the things that I actually say when I go to churches is, I'd basically say we across Australia have gone silent about our faith. And, you know, I say, well, would God still help people become Christians? Yes, of course. But it's you do miss out. Like, you miss out on that real rich connection in terms of being able to speak about something that's really important to you. And I often say in churches, actually, I've started asking people permission to talk about my faith and with my non-Christian friends, and I get a resounding of course. And so that actually is quite freeing in terms of going, this is a great thing that I can be more myself now. And I think it shifts the relationship quite a bit.
It's like when you say to someone, can I pray for you about that? And very rarely do they say no, because even if they don't believe in God, they're like, what have I got to lose? Like, what have I got to lose from this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so no, it's been pretty fascinating seeing what's going on around the church. I'm also involved in, I'm the co-regional director for Lausanne, which is basically a worldwide or global gathering of all sort of the key people and thinking about the Great Commission and where are we up to with all that. And gee, that's sort of fascinating to see around the world how we're going with people sharing their faith. And I'd have to say in the West, man, we're not doing so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unsurprising.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
actually a really great report out just recently called the Great Commission Report. So if anyone wants to look at that, it's lausanne.org, and pretty fascinating report.
Oh, that's cool. I have to check that out.
Yeah.
So if people are listening, Julie-anne, and they're thinking, how do I start then talking to my friends? Obviously you've got this course, but could you give us a few tips from that people might be able to use, even thinking about, okay, next year we're going to do something at our church, maybe I can invite my friends. How do I talk to them about stuff beforehand so that they know about things?
Yes. So the course is really to get people praying. So that's the first sort of thing. Like, actually, let's give this to God. It's God who will open the doors, and we don't have to force doors open. So if that's sort of a relief. So when you actually pray, I think getting people to once you start praying, you start noticing things. So you start seeing what God might be doing. So like I would say basic 101 evangelism, if you're really wanting to head towards this, is actually just to start praying. And that just really lifts the anxiousness, I guess, off of this, because actually this is God's work, and we can see what he is doing. So that would be my first thing. The other thing is just to be around. So prioritize being around with people who aren't Christians. I have been quite shocked how many people don't have friends who are non-Christians. And I think that's sad for us, because actually it's good for us. It actually really sharpens our own faith. It's like so many times I'm going, actually, that's a good point. My non-Christian friend, and it actually helps me grow in my faith. And, there are some tricky questions. And actually, we just finished producing a tricky questions course or module in the Ripple Effect course.
I saw that on your website. It looks fun.
Yeah, because I actually think this is like get skilled up. Like if you are worried about some of the tricky questions, and they are tricky because they're tricky for us. Yeah. And so let's actually let's sort it out for ourselves in terms of what do we think about this and why. And so then that actually reduces the anxiety for people if you're thinking about things yourself. So I would say just hang out with people who aren't Christians, see where it goes. Yeah. But also to be a bit prepared. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so having non-Christian friends is such a beautiful thing, because it's so people good. Like everybody else, right? Yeah. And I would often find that so often at church we can be so busy with all of our church things that we don't actually have time to do things outside church. Yeah. And like they're good and important things we're doing at church, but I was in the state emergency service for a few years, which I loved, because I got to use chainsaws and do all sorts of super fun things. Yeah. And there were like 70 people in my unit. There were not many Christians. And I talked to some of my Christian friends and be like, this is an amazing thing to do. Like, you get to play with chainsaws and really help and serve your community in times of crisis, right? Yeah. And for me, I was working in ministry at the time. So it was great to actually have people call you do the job, you fix the job, and it's done. Yeah. You don't get that in ministry so much. Yeah. And people would be like, I'm just so busy with church. And I thought, it's really sad that we can't get involved in these things because we're kept so busy with our church stuff. Yeah. And of course that's important too. But when it's so important that it stops us from actually engaging in the world around us, I think that can be a really sad thing, and something maybe to think about and evaluate for ourselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also it actually helps us in the church to be engaging in a much better way. I think that was the beauty of someone like Tim Keller, who totally just had a real heart for New York, but actually he spent a lot of time with non-Christians. Like he just really wanted to understand what is going on in this culture, because actually he got better as a minister by understanding the non-Christians and working out how does the gospel fit into this whole big conversation. And they saw many people come to faith. And I just feel like, wow, that's what, if this is part of your job, actually, if you're in ministry, to be able to spend a significant amount of time actually engaging with non-Christians. I just think it would help us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, with Anglicanism, we've got a parish model. So there's a whole kind of geographic area that your church is there for, even if they don't realize that your church is there for them. So how can you and your community serve the community that you're in and be involved in it?
And so many Anglican churches do such an awesome job of serving their community.
Absolutely.
And so it's working out, okay, that's meeting one of their needs, but actually perhaps meeting their spiritual need as well. How could we do that in a beautiful way? Yeah, that's great. And having some thinking about tricky questions that you come across is also great. I'm a theologian. I've done lots and lots of theology study, and I still don't have all of the answers. And people often ask me questions, and I sit there going, "That's a really great question." But I also think there's something really beautiful about finding out together. Yes.
So it's really great to look at the tricky questions, but also I feel like we shouldn't always feel that we have to have all of the answers before we can do everything.
That's right. Yeah. And also, like, I think the other thing is when you're a theologian, what you're doing is you might have a little passage that expands out. And so you're developing this beautiful sort of vision of what the Bible is saying. But actually, most evangelists try and work the opposite way. We get all this information. And how do we, somebody asked me the other day, like one of my friends said, "Oh, what are you up to for Easter?" And I said, our life group's doing the Passover. And she goes, "Well, what is the Passover?" And I'm going, how do I do a biblical history around what the Passover is? And I did. I ended up in about 5 minutes trying to reduce down the whole of the Old Testament together to be able to help her understand the Passover and how that looks like in the church. And anyway, it was just so funny going, oh, wow, how do I do this in a few minutes?
Yeah. And yes. We kind of wish we had that part on the road to Emmaus where Jesus explains everything to the disciples. If only they could have written that part down, that would have been really helpful for all of us.
And there's sort of something good about the Bible in that there is no one answer. And it's because it's a story all the way through. Like people just responding to what the culture is at that point and really speaking into it. And there's something really lovely about how there's not one answer and then we give that to that person and then they become a Christian. Actually, there's something beautiful about people and relationships and culture and different times, and actually it keeps moving, and like the gospel stays the same, but actually we connect differently to people and it comes up in different points, and I don't know, I just love that journey with people.
It's beautiful. And then and it relates back to the making sure we're praying, as you said, like, what is God already doing here? Like, God goes before us. God, this is God's mission. We're just involved in it, right?
Yes.
So what is God doing that we can be involved in, and just keeping an eye out for where God is working in our lives, in other people's lives, in our culture as a whole. Yeah. I agree. Very nice. Well, if you agree with me, that's probably a good place to wrap it up then, right? I feel like it is. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Julie-anne? Would you like to give us your website for the ripple effect, and people can have a look at that if you want to?
If you look up Ripple Effect Evangelism under Google, it's like ripple-effect.net. Maybe .au.
Anyway. Google is good.
And you can sign up. I've got a few things that we offer people, and really keen to help everyday Christians as much as possible. So
that's great. Thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast,
No
Julie-anne. It's
worries.
been great to chat with you. It's been a lot of fun. And I look forward to hearing more about your ministry as it goes forward. And I hope that we can all be everyday Christians as we just live out our lives as Christians and engage with that.
So, thanks, Christy. Appreciate that.
Do check out that website, everyone. And thanks for joining us here today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.